Michael Lestrange, welcome to ASPI.
Thanks very much, Graham. Great to be here.
Tell me about working as a young public servant with Justice Hope.
Well, this was back in 1983, a long time ago now, 34 years ago. And I suppose my takeout, and I had about the best part of a year with him on that Royal Commission, quite a small staff. My takeouts from those years was that he was very engaging as a person and he was deeply impressive as a professional. This was quite an imposing challenge, as you say, for a young public servant, going to work for a distinguished Justice of the Supreme Court of New South Wales who had already produced a landmark Royal Commission report on the intelligence and security agencies. So it was with some trepidation that I went. But I have to say from the outset, as a person, he was warm, engaging, open, humorous, and surprisingly for me, extremely attentive to the views of a very junior public servant. And
it's always interesting to hear how leaders deal with staff. How much did he take from his staff? How much did he actually let his staff have a go?
He let them have a big go, and in the end, of course, everything he put down was his. But he did actually give us authority, and we did engage with the agencies on his behalf. And he was very attentive to our views, but at the end of the day, he made his own judgments.
Did he argue it out? Was he a hard arguer?
He was very. It was like appearing before a judge. But as I say, his personality was such that he was self-deprecating, even though he was highly knowledgeable, having spent 3 years on these issues. He was very attentive to the ways in which it had changed. So I really appreciated just the engagement with him and his humanity and his openness, and I liked him as a person, and we got on well together. But the other part of him, Graham, that really left an enduring mark with me was his professionalism on these Royal Commission issues. He was fearless and he was forensic. He treated everybody that appeared before him and all the submissions that were made to him strictly on their merits. He followed the evidence wherever it led. And the other thing about him I found was that although he was very attentive to what people presented to him, he cut through verbiage and cliches and waffle like a knife through butter.
So did he have that really important leadership ability to actually surprise himself, to be taken aback by what he found?
I think he was very open to a strong argument, and I think that was a very judicial instinct. I think he had a sense of what was right and wrong, good and bad in relation to the agencies, but he was open to an argument about how things had changed or developed or how circumstances had changed. The other thing about him that I really admired was his capacity at the end of the day to sum up the arguments for and against a particular proposition better than the proponents themselves had argued, and then to dissemble it and basically pull out the strengths and weaknesses of both sides and come to a reasoned conclusion. So that even if you didn't actually agree with his outcome, you could see the reasoning behind it. And I like to think that this review that we've just done reflects some of that discipline and logic. In other words, that the evidence was assembled, the arguments presented, and a reasoned case for change made. And that was something that really, he left an enduring mark on me in terms of how we went about this process with the intelligence agencies, respectfully, but completely independently.
He's coming back second Royal Commission. He's revisiting the ground that he's, in a sense, tilled and created. Was there any sense that he was frustrated at what he found had been done with his first attempt? Was there some sense of, is that still going on?
I didn't get that sense. I mean, of course, it was an elongated second Royal Commission because of the Kumi-Varnov affair and because of the Sheraton break-in. That stretched it out by another 6 to 9. So it was longer than he thought it would be. But it was a health check on where he'd been. And as I look back on the legacy of both the first and the second reports, I mean, I think the enduring legacy of it is that he articulated the case for intelligence in public policy making in Australia in a way that built a bipartisan political consensus about intelligence that has endured ever since. And that was no small achievement, because as you know, in the 50s, 60s, early 70s, there was not that consensus about the intelligence community, particularly ASIO.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, that one of the almost unintended long-term effects is that this is a judge who works through Whitlam, then Fraser, and then Hawke, and that one of the real big changes you can see is that a lot of the hate, particularly the Labor Party hate of the spooks, is worked through, and the basis is laid for that political bipartisanship. It's quite a, in a sense, extraordinary knock-on effect of this.
Oh, it was, and people shouldn't underestimate what an achievement that was and how it has endured. You know, there was a very strong view on the left of Australian politics and on the left of the Australian community back in the early 70s that the intelligence agencies had confused legitimate dissent and non-conformity on the one hand with subversion on the other. And there were strong pushes for dismantling the agencies. This was the atmosphere into which Hope stepped in 1974. And I think he disappointed a lot of people on the left where he came out, which was, no, there is a place for these agencies, an important, necessary place, as long as they are subject to the rule of law, as long as they are constrained to certain activities, as long as they are properly accountable to ministers and the Parliament, and as long as they act proportionately. Now, I think laying down all of those markers, he did actually provide a bipartisan political base to go forward. I think it saved the intelligence community, and I think that's as powerful a legacy as it is.
There are a lot in the Labor Party, for instance, who would have wanted ASIO to be killed.
Yes.
And even when Hope comes back in the Second Royal Commission, how did he view some of the things that had come out of his first attempt, like the real war, say, between the Defence Intelligence Organisation and the new ONA, or the way that Malcolm Fraser had set up and created ONA? How did he view those early efforts of those creations?
Just to go back one step, after his 74, 77 Royal Commission, there were two points of friction with two different groups. One was with the left, basically parts of the left that felt disappointed that he hadn't gone further, that he'd actually made a case for the agencies properly constructed. The second group were really a lot of the public service leaders at the time who did not like the changes that he introduced in his first Royal Commission, particularly the creation of ONA. And
DIO goes to war against ONA.
JIDIO basically were involved. So there was a strong sort of push against, from the senior levels of the public service at the time. So I think he probably feared in 1983 when he came to look at this whether there had been a counter-revolution in the intervening years. Certainly I worked on ONA in that Royal Commission. I think his sense was that it had been enacted with good faith, that it was actually working well, that many, not all, but many of the frictions with JIO, DIO had shaken out. Still not completely seamless, but nonetheless a lot better than things had been. So I felt that he didn't feel there'd been significant backsliding, that ONA, although still young, was established. It was, it had clearly a growing reputation. It was attracting very, very bright, capable people. So I don't think he felt that there was a backsliding. I think the Prime Minister, Malcolm Fraser, was strongly committed to it. So I think generally, in terms of the health check, I think he felt that the markers that he put down and the legislation that had come in 1979 in relation to ASIO had done justice to the parameters that he set.
One of the other key markers was he, in many ways, saved or set on a new footing the Overseas Spy Service, ASIS. ASIS's parental body had essentially wanted to drown it. People like Tang, major mandarins in this town, didn't want the spy service. They wanted to kill ASIS.
That's true.
Why did he accept the need for ASIS, and how important was that imprimatur from him?
I think he was intrigued by the depth of opposition within some elements of the Department of Foreign Affairs to the idea of an overseas intelligence service, and never really convinced by the arguments that they made. And this was again one of the reasons why I think there was a backlash against the first Royal Commission. But nonetheless, I think his argument was not only was it necessary, properly constrained, properly accountable, but it was desirable as well, given the way in which the world was moving at the time, and that he saw a very clear distinction in that late 70s, early 80s period between foreign intelligence and security intelligence. And he felt that there were obviously different rules that applied, because on one hand you were dealing with Australians, for the most part. On others it was a more foreign field. So he saw a number of these distinctions as very important. One was foreign and security intelligence, and he saw a role for both. One was between collection and assessment. He saw those as quite distinct. Another one was between intelligence and law enforcement, again quite distinct. And another one again between intelligence assessment and policy formulation. Now, all of those distinctions were important operating principles that he brought to bear in relation to the intelligence community, and they're still with us. In our view and in our review, they need some updating to reflect the current state, 40 years on, of the security environment, but at their core, they have proved fundamentally important for the intelligence community. So I think, back to your original question, he did see a distinction between foreign and security intelligence, but he saw a role for both, and in the end, of course, made strong representations about the public declaration of ASIS and, in fact, its incorporation under legislation.
To end then, how did Justice Hope shape your view of the world and your understanding of what intelligence can and can't do?
He had a very clear view about this. I mean, he saw, having come to this, I think, with an open mind, given his own background, he was convinced in a very genuine way that intelligence had a proper role to play in good governance in Australia, that it could provide hard evidence on the intentions and capabilities of other states. It could provide good assessments on trends, patterns, discontinuities, opportunities, threats that Australia's security situation presented. And in that way, it could inform policy making and reduce uncertainties. So he saw that very clearly. At the same time, he wanted people to know, particularly politicians, what intelligence could not do and how it could not afford to be structured. It could not afford to be freewheeling and unaccountable. And it could not predict the future because it was largely dealing with probabilities, not certainties. So the expectations of it needed to be realistic. What it needed to do was to explain the forces at work in on certain issues that would enable the Australian government to exert an influence to advance Australia's national interests. And I think that's a very important point, that at heart, Justice Hope was a strong Australian nationalist. And he understood the importance of cooperating with other countries on intelligence issues. But at the end of the day, he felt they needed to be crafted to Australia's circumstances and Australia's interests. And again, all of those things have stayed with me over the 35 years since, and really came home to me very powerfully in this review, and I hope some of those values are reflected in it.
Michael, it's interesting in this town, the shapes and sizes that wattle proud Australians come in.